and in conjunction with, and all you people out there from the Mole Valley Arts Festival. So there's and tonight we are going to the woods for the second week running, and we're going to start, I think, with the amazing Seth Townsend. The floor is yours, Seth.
Thank you very much, John. It's wonderful to be here after tramping back from wet, wild and leafy Dorset, because I feel I'm somehow connected tonight because I've been in the woods and I've been in the rain. And when you're in the woods and in the rain and you're wearing rainproofs, you get very switchy or sweaty. So you can't tell that I'm very sweaty, but I literally got here a few minutes ago and here I am starting. So hello, everybody. It's lovely to see you. Not only do I feel connected to the woods tonight because I've been in Dorset, but because we're in the middle of the Jewish holiday of Sukkot. Now, Sukkot is the time when we build little shelters. And I've made mine out of branches that I cut very caringly from various trees, because we must always look after trees. And I've saved them over the years. They're very nice long branches to build my little booth, my little shelter. And on the top, there are cuttings again of branches with leaves, so that over the 8 days of the Jewish festival of Sukkot, we sit in the booth and we eat our meals. And if you're very religious, you sleep in it. But of course, you have to be able to see the moon. So you can't cover it with too many branches and too many leaves. You have to make sure that you can see the moon and that you can feel the rain when it rains. And with that story, I want to tell another 2 little stories that connect with the woods. And the first is quite well known, but it's been told in different ways. And the person who first told it and put it in a book was quite confused at the response that he got, because some people really loved the story and some people hated the story. But I've rounded it off in a way that I hope will fit in with our times of conserving and taking care. It's a very simple, very short story to start with. And it's about a boy. And the boy would go into the woods. And in the woods, he saw what you don't always see in woods, an apple tree. And this apple tree was a beautiful apple tree with lots of branches. And the boy loved to swing in the branches, and he would eat an apple and he would go home. And he was happy and the tree was happy. And he would come regularly to that tree and he would play in the branches. He was a bit of a loner, but the tree didn't mind. The tree loved having him there, swinging from the branches, eating an apple or two. And the tree was happy and the boy was happy. But the time came when the boy didn't come so often because he was growing up. He was becoming a teenager. And one day he came with a young girlfriend and he carved his name, Me, and he carved YT, that was her initials, in the tree. And the tree was happy. And the boy, because the tree always called him the boy, and the boy was happy. Well, it happened that he was really sweet on this girl. And he came back to the tree, and the tree could tell that he wasn't happy, because even though he was sweet on the girl, he didn't have anything to give her. And the tree said, "Take my apples and sell them, and then you can buy her a nice present." And he took the apples. The tree was happy and he was happy. Well, time passed again and the boy came back And he wanted to live with this young woman, but he hadn't got a house to live in. And the tree said, take my branches and you can build a house. And that's what he did. The tree was happy, the boy was happy, and years passed. And the boy eventually came back. And the tree was concerned. And the tree said, what's happening? And the boy said, everything's gone wrong. My marriage is on the rocks. I can't get on with my wife. And I just feel I want to travel the world. And the tree said, take my trunk and make a boat. And so the boy cut down the trunk of the tree and hollowed it out and made a boat and sailed around the world. And years again passed until a slightly older man returned to what was now just the stump of a tree. And the tree was sad, the stump of the tree was sad, and the stump of the tree said, I can't give you anything. And the boy said, I don't need anything. I just need a place to sit. And don't be sad. I should be the one who's sad for you, because I took everything you got and I never gave anything in return. But as he sat there, he looked around and he saw little trees growing. And he knew that to make an apple tree grow properly, you had to work on it. And he came back and he looked after those little baby trees that were growing around the original tree. And of those trees, he helped them to become apple trees, and he helped them to bear fruit. And the tree was happy, and the trees were happy, and the boy was happy. And so that's the first little story. And I'll tell you another story. Are you ready for another story? Yes? It's really weird here. I can't. Let me look. Are you ready for another story?
Of course we're ready for another story.
Yes, thank you. It's so bizarre. Anyway, let's have another story. I see some smiling faces, and that's very helpful. This story is not just about trees and the forest, it's also about trades. And it's about the East End of London. Because the East End of London, at the very edge of the city, was right up against the forest of Essex that came right up to the East End of London. Now, the East End of London was a place where many immigrants and many people who weren't in the middle of the city, they weren't liked so much. So they would go to the outside of the city, to the East End. And the East End is a traditional place for tailors to live and for people who, well, the Jewish tailors came, the Huguenot silk makers and glove makers came, the Irish came, the Somali people came, the Bangladeshi people came, and all of them were connected with making things out of fabric. And there was a tailor. He was walking out to a village on the other side of the forest that was on the other side of the East End. And tailors in those days would always have a belt around their waist. And hanging from the belt, there was a little bag. And in the bag were all the tailor's needles and threads. And that was hanging around the belt. Another thing that was hanging from the belt was a pair of scissors, or maybe two, that would hang around the belt. And the last most important thing of all these tools was an iron. Now, an iron, as you know, makes the cloth flat. But in those days, a flat iron was made of iron, not made of steel now, and you'd put it on a hot fire to make it hot. And it was very heavy, but nevertheless, the tailor carried it on the belt around his waist. On the belt, he would move around whether he wanted the little bags of needle and thread, or the scissors, or the iron. And he was walking through this forest outside London one day. And he was walking and walking, and he was enjoying nature when he heard la 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 la. He looked around, but he didn't know what it was. And he carried on walking. La 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 la. And he looked, and he could see quite a big tree, and he could tell that the music was coming from the tree. And as he approached the tree, la 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 la. How is this possible? Music, singing, coming from a tree. So he reached into the little bag around his waist, and he picked out the biggest needle that he had, and he stuck it into the tree. La 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 la. It kept on singing, so he stuck it in the tree. La 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 la. So he stuck it into the tree a third time, and as he stuck, it wouldn't come out. And it suddenly turned into a key, and the key turned, and the door opened, and something pushed him, and he was in the tree, and he fell down to the bottom of the tree, and he could smell that tree smell. He could smell what it was like when there are leaves and all the smells of the inside of a tree. And it was dark, and he looked around, and then he saw a bright little light, and then another and another and another, and the lights were silvery, and they were pointed, and it wasn't lights at all. It was hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of needles that came and started to stick themselves all over his body. Oh no, 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 no. It was terrible. He was being punched and punctured and pricked, and then he thought, I've got to get out of here. So he reached again and moved the belt around and found his biggest pair of scissors and started to hack and to hit and to hack and to cut and to thwart until he made another hole just big enough for himself to get through. And he thought, I'm getting out of this tree. And he went through that hole, and but he was in another dark chamber of the tree when he heard snip, snip, knip, knip, snip, knip, snip, knip, knip, snip, snip, slice, snap, and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pairs of scissors started to come and cut at his clothes and tear at his skin. It was terrible. What can I do? And of course, you remember he's got another very important tool around his waist, and that was the flat iron, and with the pointed end and the blunt end. He hit and he knocked and he thwarted and he hit and he banged and he pushed and he banged until another hole big enough for him to get through, and he could smell the fresh air. He was outside the tree. He was in a thorn bush, and he tried to move this way, and as he moved this way, the thorns went in his hand, and he moved that way, and the thorns went in his legs, and he was covered in thorns. But he saw over on the other side of a leafy little glade, he saw a dead, empty tree, and he ran towards it. But before he got into the dead, empty tree, bang, 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 it was rain. It had started to rain, but it wasn't ordinary rain. It was raining irons, and he was bruised, and he was black, and he was blue, and he was covered in bruises all over him. But he got eventually, with all these irons raining down upon him, he got into that hollow, empty tree, and at last, as he rubbed his bruises and the cuts and then he looked down and he saw hundreds and hundreds and thousands of red ants crawling up his legs and biting him. And he said, no, 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 if this would only stop, I promise I will never, ever hurt a tree again. And it stopped. The ants disappeared. It stopped raining irons. And he looked, and he went over to the tree that he jabbed with his scissors and cut with his needle and hit with his iron. And he put his hands against the tree, and he felt the energy of the tree. And from that day until this, tailors generally are very respectful of the forest and the woods and the trees. Thank you.
Steph, that was wonderful. You must come and do us a full live set one evening.
Whatever, okay, I will.
Yeah, I was just floating away on your voice there. It was just fantastic. But
Thank you, John.
We have more fantastic to come. And with someone who actually has a new book out at the moment on this very subject. So, which you can talk about yourself, Lisa, but for the moment, could you please welcome Lisa Snow?
Thank you very much.
Got that right. And I've been practicing getting the name right all evening.
Oh, it's taken me a while to get it, I can tell you. Thank you very much. And yes, you're very kind to put a plug in for the new book. I have got a book of woodland folk tales out. It came out last week, which is exciting. It looks like this. It says Woodland Folk Tales on the cover. And the story I've got for you this evening is not from it. Hooray! But there we are. Anyway, thank you. Seth, thank you. Those were gorgeous stories as well. I'm talking to you from the edge of Dartmoor in Devon, and I've been storytelling in school all day today, up in Barnstaple, in a socially distanced classroom, all very sanitized and careful and all of these things. And one of the things we've been talking about in school today has been blackbirds. And we've listened to the blackbird song, and we have talked about how blackbirds are not completely black. They've got a tiny little ring of orangey gold colour around their eye. And of course, they've got an orangey gold beak as well. And it got me to thinking about blackbirds. They're quite a fantastic bird. If you look at blackbirds in folklore, certainly in British folklore, they're a kind of boundary bird. They're meant to lead you into the other world. They're meant to be there just on the boundary of everything. And if you know blackbirds, I've been, I think we've had 3 broods of blackbirds in the garden this year during lockdown. They've been absolutely hilarious. Young teenage blackbirds, I think, are possibly the clumsiest thing you've ever seen. But blackbirds, you probably know, have got 3 different calls. One of the blackbird's calls is that gorgeous warbling song that we hear in springtime, in dusk. You know, that lovely, lovely, warm, rich song of the countryside? That's one of the songs. The second of the blackbird songs is a really ridiculous alarm call. And if you're ever out there as the sun is starting to go down, you will hear the blackbird telling everything off. It's a kind of chiding call. And the blackbird is almost saying, it's getting dark, as if it had never happened before. It's really getting dark now, it's dark. That's the second call. The third call of the blackbird is a call that a number of other birds also do. And it's a funny little call. It's a kind of seep, seep. And I've never quite worked out what that little call means, other than perhaps, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here, it's me. And that is the particular blackbird call that happens in the story that I've got for you. And this story was originally told to me by a storyteller, wonderful storyteller in Exeter called David Heathfield. And he was given it by a student of his. He teaches English as a foreign language, and he was given it by a student from South Korea. So this is a South Korean blackbird story. And it concerns a couple called Mr. and Mrs. Park. I know, it's a bit of a strange name, go with it. Mr. and Mrs. Park, well, they were lucky because they met young. They must have married when they were all but 16, and they were so happy together. They were so in love with one another. They were devoted to one another, to helping one another along in life and to creating the best life they could together. And they lived in a little cottage on the edge of the woods. And they loved life together, just being in each other's company. And as the years went on, they worked hard, they played hard. The one thing that never happened that they would have liked is that they never had children. They were never given that blessing. But Mr. and Mrs. Park carried on working and laughing and loving through the years. And when we meet them at the beginning of this story, they must have both been well into their 80s. They both thought they were still teenagers, you know, but they were well into their 80s, and their bodies were really starting to cause them problems. Whether it was being crocked up with their limbs or their back going, or just generally finding everyday tasks a bit more difficult, and even finding helping each other a bit more difficult. But still, they soldiered on with very, very good humour. And one morning in springtime, Mr. Park opened the door of their little cottage and looked out to the woods beyond. And there in the clearing, before the woods began properly, there was a black shape on the grass, and it was flapping and flailing about. It wasn't making any noise. And as Mr. Park hobbled up to get a closer look, he could see it was a male blackbird. And the blackbird couldn't seem to fly off. The blackbird saw him approaching. The blackbird looked terrified, but still made no noise. And the blackbird allowed Mr. Park to pick it up. And he could see something bad had happened. He could see that one of the blackbird's wings was broken. And Mr. Park hurried inside. He got a box. He put a blanket in the box. He laid the blackbird very carefully down in the box. And Mr. and Mrs. Park then set about the very messy business of looking after a blackbird. If you've ever done that, you will know exactly how to charm worms from the lawn, and you will know just what a mess they can make. They put a little splint on the wing of the blackbird, and they nursed that blackbird back to health, carefully, lovingly, over the next few weeks. And the day came when the blackbird was healed, when its wing was healed again, when it had done a few little test flights, and it was now ready to let the bird go in the wild again. Mr. Park carried the box out to the ground in front of the woods. Very carefully, he lifted the blackbird out and put it on the ground and said, "There, you can go now. Go, fly." The blackbird opened its beak and gave one little call. Seep, seep. And the blackbird flew up to the first tree at the edge of the woods. And then it stopped. It turned towards Mr. Park, and again came the little song, seep, seep, seep. And it stayed there watching him. It was as if it had something to say. It was as if it wanted him to follow. Mr. Park hobbled up to the tree and looked up to the blackbird. "What is it?" The blackbird flew up and flew to the tree behind, and then stopped on the branch, turned, opened its beak, and sang again, "Seep." And Mr. Park followed. The blackbird was flying lightly back from tree to tree, from branch to bough to leaf to tree. Mr. Park was having a bit more of a difficult time keeping up with it, hobbling and trying not to trip over brambles and tree stumps and ferns. But they carried on in this way. The blackbird always flying to the next tree, Mr. Park always following. That gleaming dark eye of the blackbird with the orange ring around it, always watching Mr. Park, getting him to follow and follow and follow. They must have gone on like this for an hour, 2 hours. Mr. Park wasn't as fit as he used to be. His limbs didn't work as well as they used to. He was getting tired. And just when he thought of even calling up to the blackbird and asking, they came to a clearing in the woods. And anyone who knows any stories about woodland will know that things always happen in clearings in woods, right? Well, the blackbird flew up and over the clearing, and it landed on the tree over the other side of the clearing and turned again. And there was the song, "Seep, seep." And there in the middle of the clearing, there was a pile of rocks. And as Mr. Park hobbled towards it, he could see. He got through the swampy ground around it, and he could see that bubbling up in the stone there was a clear spring of water. And he was thirsty. And as the blackbird watched with its beady eye, Mr. Park, with difficulty, leant on one of the stones and reached down with his hand, scooped up some water, and started to drink. That was good water. Mind you, he hadn't walked that far in a good long month or two, and he scooped and drank some more water. That was really good water. It must be so clear from the woods. It must be so pure. And he drank some more, and he drank some more. All the time, the blackbird watching. But it still seemed the more water he drank, the better he felt, the clearer his mind, the stronger his limbs, the more energy he felt in his heart and in his belly. And he carried on drinking. Do you know, this was the best water he had ever tasted in his life? And his back straightened. And he started to look around the woods and to notice the little detail, the edges of the leaves, the insects flitting past. Everything seemed to have more colour and more line and more scent and more sound to it than when he'd first gone into that clearing. But eventually, when he had drunk his fill, and he'd finished as much water as he thought he could take, he looked up to the blackbird still watching him over the clearing, and he said, "Thank you." The blackbird just tipped its head onto one side. Mr. Park bowed and left the clearing. And his legs worked better. His feet set more sure in among the woodland floor, in among all the plants. He wove his way through the trees and found his way back home in half the time he had on the way. He felt so much better. He must tell his wife about this spring. And he opened the door of their little cottage and he walked in. And his wife called from the other room, "Who is it?" "Oh, it's me, my love," he said. And there she was, all stooped and cropped, standing in the door of the living room. And she took one look at him and she said, "Get out! Get out! Who are you? Get out!" "Oh, it's me, my love." And she hobbled up towards him until she was so close in front of his face she could actually see it. And she said, "Yes, it is you. But it's the same you that I married all those years ago. You look exactly like you're 16 years old. Your cheeks are just as ruddy and clear, and your hair as black and shining as ever it was. My love, it's you, you're back again." Well, it wasn't that long before the 16-year-old Mr. Park and the 80-odd-year-old Mrs. Park were walking back through the woods and retracing his steps all the way through that difficult land. And he was holding onto her hand every step of the way, holding her, steadying her, giving her an arm to lean on as she struggled through the woods. And eventually they got back to the clearing in the woods. There were the rocks. There was the bubbling spring. There ahead of them, sitting on the tree as if it had barely moved, was the blackbird, regarding them with its beady eye. And he helped her through the swampy bits up to the rocks, and he helped her as she reached down, scooped up some water from the spring in her hand, and she drank. And as she drank, he watched. He watched his love transform in front of his eyes. He watched her brow unfurrow. He watched the lines smooth from around her eyes, and her hair change from white to pepper to sleek, elegant black. He saw the sparkle come back into her eyes, her limbs lengthen and plumpen out, until he said, "That's enough now. You are now exactly the same age as when we married. All of 16. There is no need to remember anymore. We're here again." And she put her hand in his, and they nearly skipped back to that little cottage, but not before they had both turned to the blackbird, and they had bowed, and they had said, "Thank you." Well, back at the little cottage, they were into that cottage before you knew it, and they closed the door, and they got on with the business of being 16-year-old newlyweds. But a few days later, there was a knock at the door. It was their neighbour. His name was Mr. Who. Now, let me tell you about Mr. Who. He wasn't as old as they had been. He was maybe in his mid-50s, but if you listened to Mr. Who and if you believed him, you would think that he had never had a happy day in his entire life, apart from when he was enjoying telling you about all of his misery and all of his difficulty and all of the awful things that people did to him. Well, he had got the latest instalment just for them. He'd knocked on the door for a cup of tea just to come round to talk at them for a while. But when Mrs. Park opened the door, he was amazed. Come in, she said. "Come in for a cup of tea. We'll tell you all about it." And they both sat in the lounge with a cup of tea and Mr. Who with his cup of tea, and they started to tell him the story. The blackbird and the broken wing, the song, the trees, the forest, the clearing and the spring, and the water. And you know, they barely finished that part of the story before Mr. Who's teacup went flying in one direction and the saucer went flying in another, and he was out the door. He was out the door and into the woods to find the spring and find it for himself. Wait, said Mr. Park. "We haven't finished yet." But they looked at one another. And they said, "Well, what will happen will happen. We hope he finds happiness from it at last. Maybe we'll hear from him later today." And they carried on with their day. And the sun rose high in the sky, and it was down nearly to dusk at the other side. And still there was no sign of Mr. Who returning from the woods. Mr. and Mrs. Park looked at one another and said, "Well, we need to go and find him. We feel responsible. We need to check he's all right." And they made their way through the woods to the clearing where the spring was, and the boggy ground, and the blackbird still in the tree watching. There was nobody else in the clearing. There wasn't another soul to be seen. The only difference was that this time, up by the spring, it seemed that somebody had been there, because there was a pile of old clothes by the spring. And as Mrs. Park squelched her way through the soggy bit of the ground and up to the spring, she could see that the old shirt lying there on the ground on the rocks, and something inside it moved. It was a toad or a frog or something. And she went over to the pile of clothes and she pulled the collar of the shirt back very carefully. And underneath that shirt, there was the red, screwed up face of a tiny, newborn baby. Mr. Who? What have you done? How much did you drink? Well, Mr. Park was now rushing up to the spring to find out what had happened, but Mrs. Park had scooped up that little baby in her arms. And Mr. Park said, "What can we do?" "I know exactly what we should do," said Mrs. Park. "Here is the baby that we never had. And now we have the chance to look after it, to raise it as our own, and to give it all the love that we can." And Mr. and Mrs. Park, with their new baby, walked back through the woods to their little cottage, and they closed the door. Now, whether Mr. Who had a bit better time of it in life this time around, brought up in a loving house with Mr. and Mrs. Park, than he did the first time, well, I'll leave that one to your imagination.
Oh, it's wonderful, Lisa. Thank you. And we've got David. He told you who you got that story from. She is doing a set for us on Wednesday, the 14th.
Wonderful.
So, yeah, so
great storyteller.
That's brilliant. Now, we'll move across the water a little bit to just across the Irish Sea, and he's left Lizzie's barn for 2 seconds, where he seems to live, or at least on Saturday nights. And please, could you welcome Colin Irwin?
Thank you. I think I managed to get a comment off there before I was on, John. But if I didn't get the comment away, I wanted to say to Lisa that if that story didn't make it to the book must be absolutely wonderful. That was great, Lisa. Thank you very much indeed. I am talking to you from the north coast of Ireland, and Ireland is the least forested country in Europe. It used to be completely blanketed in wild green wood, of course, but from the reign of Elizabeth I, for a period of about 200 years thereafter, it was the wildwood of Ireland was completely decimated. And it was once said that Irish oak trees built the English ships that defeated the Spanish Armada. I don't know how true that is, but it's an old saying in Ireland. And since the Irish lost their native wildwood, they began to develop a deeper relationship with individual trees, especially if there was some folklore attached to them. So you can think of, for example, fairy thorns. But my favourite tree, and the favourite of so many around where I live here, was a Spanish chestnut tree. And I want to take you back to May 1588, when 130 ships set sail from Coruña on the north coast of Spain. They sailed up and anchored off the French port of Calais, and awaited a rendezvous with the army of the Duke of Parma, and with high hopes of course, invading England and dethroning Elizabeth I, and presumably turning England back to Catholicism. But of course, we all know what happened in history, the ensuing battle of, I never know whether it's gravel lines or grave lines, but I'm going to say grave lines. The Spanish fleet was attacked by the English at night by fire ships, and they were scattered to the four winds. And they sailed up the east coast of England, as you know, around the north of Scotland, to head back to Spain the long way around Ireland. But in the Atlantic waters to the north of Ireland, they were struck by ferocious weather. And it some history books will tell you that up to 6,000 Spanish sailors perished around the coasts of Ireland, from Antrim, where I live, in the north, right round to County Kerry in the southwest. But I want to tell you a little bit about one young Spanish sailor whose body drifted down in through the North Channel into the Irish Sea. And he washed up on a little sandy bay about 5 miles where I'm sitting from now. And he washed up on the beach there, and the local people, there's a small little village there called Ballygally now. Goodness knows what there was there then. I suspect not very much. But the local people took his body and they carried it to the nearest consecrated ground, which was 1 mile inland, a place called Cairn Castle, which is to this day a tiny little hamlet. And they buried this young Spanish sailor in the graveyard there. And the story goes that in his pockets were sweet chestnuts, presumably being carried as a snack. And one of the chestnuts germinated, and from that chestnut grew a mighty Spanish or sweet chestnut tree with a huge girth, and it was beloved by all the locals because of the story attached to it, and tourists came from everywhere to have their photograph taken beside this tree, and it was a great tree for getting a hug from. Sadly, in June of this year, one breathless night, there wasn't even the hint of a breeze, and we know this because it was captured on CCTV. The tree just toppled over from old age, fell over onto its side. And of course, everyone around here was very sad about it. And I was commissioned to commemorate its passing. And so here is the story of the Spanish chestnut tree in verse. 432 years ago, almost to the day, I was washed up on the sandy shore of Ballygally Bay, in the pocket of a sailor fighting for the Spanish king against the cruel weather and the English Virgin Queen. The poor sailor had drowned at sea and never got to taste my sweet chestnut flesh, but I did not go to waste. I survived that wretched journey from the sunny coast of Spain and found myself in Ireland, starved by cold and rain. And there I might have died myself, shriveled in my skin. But they buried that poor sailor and me along with him. I shivered in that cold, wet ground so far away from home, praying for the sun to warm the fertile, peaty loam. Next spring, I poked my head up. I never felt so brave, but I was greeted by a wind that was colder than the grave. How I longed for my homeland of oranges and heat, where the olive groves are fragrant and all the chestnuts sweet. But here I grew, undisturbed but for the Irish weather. My roots consumed the flesh and bones and boots of Spanish leather, of my unwitting sailor friend, unworldly and unlearned, who thought he would consume me. Oh, how the tables turned. I've seen many things in my long life. Who hasn't, I suppose? But for every question answered, 100 more were posed. From this tranquil churchyard, I saw wars and famine rage, and the greed and foolishness of man is etched on every page. Perhaps I should be grateful. It was man's folly brought me here, but so far away from my homeland, the price I paid was dear. Alone I stood, without the hope that ever there might be a sapling growing somewhere from seed passed on by me. I am not a common conker tree that Irish schoolboys climb. I am a sweet Spanish chestnut, estranged from my own kind. And though from all the native trees I have stood apart, from the singing of the chaffinch and the blackbird, Lisa, I took heart. The robin through dark winter days, noisy rooks in spring, and what joy each Sunday morning to hear the people sing. I have stood against wind and rain, my boughs have creaked with snow, but still in all, my ancient heart never failed to grow. For no matter where you find yourself, you must do the best you can, be you sweet Spanish chestnut tree or native Irish man. And now, alas, my time has come, as to everything it must. And to you, my fellow beings, my old wooden heart, I trust. Make something useful out of me, a bower or a seat, where pilgrims take a moment to sit down and rest their feet. And let the children climb and play while you remember me, and tell them all the story of the Spanish Armada tree.
Oh, beautiful, Colin. Beautiful.
Thank you.
So every time anyone tells a story, there's memories or stories come up. With Lisa's, I kept thinking of the wood next to Stephanie where the birds come down. I must mend that bird table tomorrow, which I promised to do. And with Collins, I couldn't even actually go back in my own memory. It was what I was told. My first crossing from Northern Ireland to England was. When it was in the 1940s, when the ferries weren't half as big as they are now, and apparently it was one of those storms, and so me just a couple of years old was sort of bouncing around up and down on the crossing, and it's just one of those stories you get told when you're growing up. Now we're going to go to Hannah Brailsford. Orla's not here, so I might finish after Hannah with a very short tree wood story. In the meantime, however you're listening, and I just think, because the people need reminding through the set that there's a little hat beneath on the site beneath it where it says "Connecting the World by Story," and we've had tellers from 2 weeks on this to the word thing. So I'm splitting up any money that goes in there from the last 2 weeks. I'm splitting up amongst everyone. So if we're lucky, we'll all get 50p each. So it's just grateful, and thank you very much, Mike, for Mike. From the Mole Valley Arts Festival, who is showing this session, or linking or putting our site up all through the Arts Festival. But right now, could you from she's back. I was rattling on because she left us. She left her little.
I was about to die.
Okay, I gave you time, did I, to get that? Okay, can you please welcome Hannah Brailsford?
Oh, thank you, John. Apologies. Yes, I've forgotten to turn the switch on the plug. That's always must remember to do that. I'm really excited to be able to tell. I've just been taken away by Seth and Lisa and Colin, and suddenly thought, oh my goodness me, I've got to tell a story. So thank you so much for your stories, because they've been wonderful. And so the story I'd like to tell, one of my favourite places, apart from the sea, is the woods. And really, from an early age, I can remember being told stories about the woods and being taken to the woods as well. And this story is a story I was told when I was very young, but not this particular one. The story I was told when I was very young is probably a story that you all know. But the one I'm going to tell you is one that's come to me in the last few months, that I found just when I was going through one of my many folktale books from around the world. And I suddenly thought, oh my goodness me, it's so true how stories travel. And this is a Portuguese version of a very well-known tale. And I'll let you see if you can work out what that tale might be. There was once a mother with two beautiful children, a son and a daughter, and they lived on the edge of the woods. And one day, the mother said to her two children, "Today I would like you to go to market, and I would like you to buy a big sack of beans. And tonight, I will make us the most wonderful bean feast. Now, while you're at market, I will go into the woods and I will gather firewood so that I can make a nice warm fire for us to enjoy our feast by. Now you must join me in the woods and help me bring back the wood that we will need once you're back from the market." And the boy said, "But mother, how will we find you in the woods? It's so big." "Do not fear, my child. I will scatter some pea shells so that you may find the exact spot where I am gathering wood." And so the two children, happy, with their coin in their pocket, went to market to purchase the big sack of beans. On their way back, when they came to the edge of the woods, they began to search for the pea shells that their mother, they knew, would have scattered for them. And sure enough, as they went into the woods, they saw a pea shell here and a pea shell there. But the further they went into the woods, they realized that the shells were beginning to be scattered this way and that. And soon they came to a point in the wood where the shells appeared to disappear. And no matter how much they searched, they could not find a single shell. They began to call their mother's name, but she didn't return their cries. And before long, they realized that they were lost. They were too afraid to continue into the woods, and they decided they would turn back and try and retrace their steps. But as they turned, the wood appeared to be different. The trees seemed to have closed in around them. Perhaps it was their fear, but they didn't know what to do. And so they decided to stay where they were and hope that maybe their mother would find her way to them. Well, the day grew long, and soon the light was beginning to fade in the forest. And the girl turned to her brother and said, "We can't stay here tonight. Who knows what might be waiting for us when the moon comes out? We're going to have to try and find our way home." And so hand in hand, they began to make their way through the trees. Suddenly, they saw a clearing. And as Lisa said, we know that in a clearing, well, things happen. And in that clearing, they saw a light, the light of a fire. Now they were cautious, and they weren't sure whether they should rush towards the light, even though they were desperate to feel its safety. And so they edged their way around the clearing to see if they could get a better look. And sure enough, they saw sitting by the fire. A little old lady, her back bent and her face showing the ages and ravages of time. And as they watched the old lady, they saw that she had a frying pan, and she was resting the frying pan upon the fire. And then they smelt what she was cooking. And they hadn't eaten all day. Oh, and the smell of those sweet cakes that she was frying over that fire. Oh, well, it was more than they could take, and certainly more than the little boy could take. We've got to go and speak to her. We've got to get some cakes. Perhaps she knows the way out of the wood. But the sister said, no, wait. We don't know who she is. Stay a while. Let's watch some more. Now, as they watched her fry those delicious cakes, they noticed in the light of the flames that there was something missing from the old lady's face. She only had one eye. The other eye, which they thought had perhaps been obscured by the dark shadows, was empty. Now, while this frightened the girl, the boy saw an opportunity. And so he let go of his sister's hand, and he crept around out of the safety of the trees into the clearing, round the blind side of the old lady. And as she picked one of those delicious cakes from the frying pan to put on her plate, he grabbed it and he ran back to his sister. What have you done? She didn't see a thing. But then they heard the woman. Is that you, cat? You mangy creature. If you are taking my cakes, be warned. I'll have your tail. Well, this made the boy laugh. Go on, you go and get one. I can't. It's easy. She can't see. She'll just think you're the cat. Quickly. And so the girl nervously followed in the path of her brother, out from the trees, out to the side of the old lady where she couldn't see. And as she took another cake and placed it on her plate, the girl grabbed it too. Is that you, cat? Right. When I catch you, your guts off my garters for sure. Well, the little girl couldn't help it. She began to laugh. Guts for garters? And she laughed and she laughed. And her brother ran out of the trees to try and drag her back, but it was too late. The old lady turned, and with her good eye, she saw the children. Ah, my lovelies. You must be hungry to be creeping up on an old lady and taking her food. I'll tell you what, if you're that hungry, why don't you come back to my house? I have plenty more sweet treats that I can share with you. Well, the fact that she wasn't angry with them and seemed to be so kind, the children decided to follow the little old lady with one eye. Soon they came to a little cottage amongst the trees. And there the lady welcomed them inside. Now, If you like my cakes, the one thing you will like even more are my sweet chestnuts. All the way from Spain. Oh, yes, the finest chestnuts. Come with me. And she led them into a little room. And before they knew what was happening, bang, she'd closed the door and locked it with a key. Now, my little ones, if you are hungry, eat, eat, eat all the chestnuts you can see. They're on me. Well, in the darkness, the children felt around them, and sure enough, there were chestnuts. And they began to pick the chestnuts up, and oh, they were sweet. And they began to gorge themselves on the chestnuts until they felt quite sick and very sleepy. Well, the next morning came, and the old lady opened the door. Ah, I see you have slept and ate well. Well, now it's time to repay me, my children. We are going into the forest together to gather wood. For tonight, I am going to fire up my clay oven, and you are going to help me have a wonderful feast. Well, the children were quite excited. For if they were going to have a feast, what could it be? They'd already had the sweetest cakes and the sweetest chestnuts. What other delights would this very kind old lady give them? And so they followed the lady into a deeper, darker part of the wood. I will stay here. You go a little further off, not too far, for you don't want to get lost and miss the feast, do you? Gather as many bits of wood as you can find and hurry back to me. And so the children did. Excitedly they went and they began to gather as many sticks as they could find. Wait, wait, beware, beware. The girl heard a voice, and she looked around, but there didn't seem to be anything there. Wait, wait, beware, beware. That woman is not what she seems. She is a witch, and she means to eat you in her feast. The girl looked, and suddenly she saw up in the tree the tiniest little figure, a wood spirit. And the wood spirit beckoned for her to come closer, and she grabbed her brother's hand and she went up to the tree. And she went on tiptoes so that she could be closer to the little spirit. And the little wood spirit said, I will help you. Listen carefully. This is what you must do. And if you do this, you will be free, and you will find your path home. The children listened to what the small spirit said, and then they heard the old woman calling, Come on, my dears, come on, it is time to fire up the oven and make it warm. We have a feast to prepare, a fine feast. So the children picked up the sticks that they had gathered together, and they went back to the little old lady, but this time they looked at her quite differently. She took them back to the house, and she busied herself at the huge clay oven, putting the firewood in. And then she said, Now, my lovely ones, I am going to light the fire, and we will wait a few hours while you can eat some more of my sweet chestnuts. Oh, yes, stuff yourselves full of chestnuts. I love chestnut stuffing. And then you will help me with the feast. Well, the children were hungry, but they had remembered what the little wood elf had said, and so they only ate a few of those chestnuts, just to steady the hunger in their stomachs. And after a few hours had passed, and that clay oven was good and hot, the old lady said, "Come, come, my little ones, now I will show you how you make a good feast. Now you see this tray. You must get up on the tray and check that my oven is hot enough. Here, here, up you get on the tray and have a little look." "Oh, but I'm not sure what you mean," said the boy. "Step up. Here, I have put the tray on a stool. Step up onto the tray, you foolish boy, and look into the oven. It is very clear." I'm sorry, but I don't understand either," said the girl. "You step onto the tray, and then you look in the oven. Just do it." Well, perhaps you could show us, and then we'd know what you mean," said the girl, sweetly. "Very well. I didn't think you were that stupid, but maybe. You've already got lost in the woods. I shouldn't expect anything else." And so the old lady, while she grumbled and mumbled to herself, she climbed up onto the tray, and as she leant towards that clay oven, the brother and sister all at once pushed, and the old lady fell tumbling into the flames. Whoosh! They didn't stop to see. They ran out of that cottage, out into the forest. And sure enough, just as the wood elf had promised, there they suddenly saw a path clear before them. And the trees no longer looked close together, and they began to walk the long walk home. And I'd like to think that they lived happily ever after.
Unmute, John.
Hello, John. We can't hear you.
I was so hung up on Hannah's story. I almost thought I was in the fire with the old woman. Yeah, it's kind of like a basic thing. If you're putting something together, you are musing. If you're trying to keep life together, well, Hannah, you're wonderful. I'll leave it at that. And right, I'm going to finish on as all is not here. I've had this story sort of rattling around through this theme, and it's I heard it years and years, probably about 25 years ago, from Dr. Kevin, and I can't remember his second name, but he's a homeopathic doctor, and he was around on that sort of 90s storytelling. He's probably still around, but I haven't bumped into him. And I might have met him on the healing field at Glastonbury or with Helen East or somewhere. Anyway, he told me this story. And it's from way back in time when my hair was dark and my beard was ginger and all my teeth were me up. And there was a young man. And he was a bit cocky. You know, he was a bit of an Essex boy. A little bit of this, a little bit of that. But he was but he lived in a little village, and that village was surrounded by forests, and the next village was on the other side of the forest. But people of that village, people had strange beliefs, and they thought they thought there was a green man in the forest. So that every night they'd put out a little drink and a little bit of food, and everyone in the village did this. And the young man says, "You're crazy, green men don't exist. You know, you're a bunch of barbarians." Anyway, the invitation came to his mate's wedding. His mate would lived in the next village. So he dressed himself up, and in those days, you dress up in velvet or something like, do you like the jacket? Got it at Maui Wowie last year. And so he dressed up, he got all his niceness on, he got on his horse and he's riding through, but it's a hot day. And anyone who's worked the festivals on summer and they're dressed up in costume will know what it's like on a hot day. You're just waiting to get back to your caravan or your tent or something so you can cool down. And it was a bit like that. So, and he's passes this lake in the middle of the forest, sort of was bigger than a pond. It was a lake size, decent one, being Essex, if you're in Essex, it's like Hatfield Forest with the lake in the middle of it, and there's like Chestnut Forest at the beginning, the East End. Because as a kid, I used to go to Hainault Forest, which was just up the road from Barking, where I was. Anyway, so I can't remember a lake in Hainault Forest, but Hatfield has definitely got one. And he goes, and he's boiling hot. I can't stand this any longer. He strips off all his clothes and he leaps in. It's so good. And he forgot about the time. He came out and his clothes were missing and his horse was missing. Kind of embarrassing. He's not going to go back. He's a young man. Can't go back. I remember one of my kids, if I didn't have him the right Adidas stuff, he wasn't even going out in public. So he looks around, he finds a few leaves and he wraps them around himself and he goes in the middle of the forest. It's getting cold, fairly cold at night, and he starts building this little hut. Twigs, and he gets his clothing, his forest clothing gets more elaborate. And he's getting hungry. You can only live on berries for so long, and it's got to be the right time of year anyway. So he suddenly remembers back in the village, about that drink, that little bit of food every night. No one would see him, it was night. So he'd wait till sort of early hours of the morning and he'd creep in. He'd collect all that drink and food. He'd take it back to his little forest hut, eat and drink all day. He's teenager, he's got early 20s, there's not much difference. Well, by the time you get to my time, there's not much difference between teens and early 20s. And so, and you can eat all day, can't you? Eat and drink, it's not sort of non-stop thing. And so it's and this goes on and on and on. But because Yulia's got to get to bed sometime, and we've got to come to the end of the story and this whole session, you can imagine, he just gets more, and he gets into the woods, he starts, gets a bit hippie, he starts sort of being nice to trees and animals, things like that. And and then he's done this for months now. He's down by the lake again. He looks on the far side of the lake. There's just a head popping out the window, the occasional stroke, something splashing around the water. And he looks down the edge. There's a nice pile of clothes. And he sees a horse tied up in the trenches. So he puts on those clothes and he takes that horse, and he rides off. And out from the lake came a flash young man who was too embarrassed to go home naked. And on that, after these brilliant stories, I just thought I'd take it down a little bit for the end. Thank you very much, everyone that's told. And Lisa, Hannah, Colin, Seth, you have been wonderful. And everyone in Mole Valley that's listening to us, and Michael, thank you for the invitation. And we've got some great stuff coming up on the World Storytelling Cafe. We've got next Friday evening. We've got young tellers, and we've got children from India, the young tellers from India, Romania, and a couple from Wales. I'm hoping, and that's going to be next Friday night. Wonderful Hungarian teller next Sunday, and next Monday, celebration of Black History Month. We've got Yusuf Jallo and Solar Story leading a discussion on African storytelling, which will be next Monday's night, connecting the world by story. Meantime, give yourselves all a huge round of applause. You have been marvelous.
John, can I say just one thing before I have to shut off here? I'm going to another Zoom meeting. All the Glens of Antrim Storytelling Festival's just over yesterday. Saw Teresa Keller there, lots watching stuff. All the stuff is on YouTube, all the videos, all the stories, everything. So if you want to have a wee look at that, please do so and leave us a wee comment. John, thank you so much. Wonderful story. Wonderful evening. Thanks very much again.
Bye-bye. And yeah, I'll get a chance to see stuff from the Glens because I've been working on this, and I get a day off in the middle of the week. I can go and actually watch the Glens. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks,
Thank you,
lovely.
Bye.
Hello, Jan.
And Trudy,
Thank you.
Trudy Terry. We can't see her face, but thank you for coming to see us.
Oh, hello, Trudy.
Okay.
Bye, Seth.
Bye, Hannah.